welcome back to another episode of the Catholic Buzz podcast. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Father Daniele, and I'm joined, as usual, by Josh Sullivan.
Hello.
Welcome to you, Josh.
Thank you.
And Matt Van Milligan.
Hello.
Welcome to you, Matthew.
Thank you.
A couple of weeks ago, we've been talking about things, people have objections to the Catholic faith. And one of the things that I constantly hear from people as I traverse the city and different ministries and even comments online is that people have lost trust in the Catholic Church over the sexual abuse crisis that has plagued the Church in recent decades. And so even though it's not very nice or easy to talk about this particular challenge, I think it's important for us to address the sexual abuse crisis because we've never done that in 5 seasons of the Catholic Buzz.
Yeah.
And I think that today we're going to unpack it. We're going to talk a little bit about it. And with really no goal in mind other than to just see where this conversation leads us. This episode might be hurtful or triggering for people who have maybe been victims of sexual abuse, especially by priests or religious. And because we're just going to talk about some cases, notable cases. We'll talk about, Matt, you have an experience in the diocese where you were before about, decision to become Catholic or not with all these sort of scandals that were going on. So we'll talk about that. And we'll talk about, people's reservations about the Church. Because it's true. The year is 2025. And I don't want to make excuses at all. Some people say, well, all the sexual abuse cases are old. They're all in the past. And I don't think that's a great attitude to have. I mean, I don't know of current cases, right? And that's just me. There could be some, I don't know. But I don't want that to be an excuse. I don't want that to be like, well, it doesn't happen anymore, because we always have to be on guard of things like this, right? But I also want to caution people who might be quick to just say, the Catholic Church is a dangerous place for young people and a dangerous place for children. As a priest, I've had situations where, I go grocery shopping and a mother with her children walk by me in the aisle, and, she kind of grabbed her children and moved them away from me as if, I was going to harm them in the middle of a grocery store or something like that, and some comments, made to me about, different things that were inappropriate. So I know that people are hurting today.
Yes.
And I also want to say right at the beginning of the episode, as a priest, but also as a human being, like, what happened was wrong.
Yeah.
What happened was wrong, period. I think, obviously, the sexual abuse was wrong. Those who survived sexual abuse have had their lives changed. Mm-hmm. And, my heart just sort of bleeds for them. And I think how the Church handled cases of sexual abuse was wrong. And I think that today, without being insensitive to people who have gone through that experience, I think that today that the Church is a safer place because of new protocols and more of an awareness of what happened in the past. So let's that all being said, let's sort of tackle this, because it's not an easy thing. Let's go back. I want to go back to, a lot of people pinpoint the explosion of sexual abuse to the 2002 scandal that happened in Boston. Mm-hmm. Remember? Yeah. All these cases of sexual abuse by priests had come to light. And there was a movie
Yeah, built on it. Scandal, I think it's called. Scandal or something like that.
I forget what the
Oh
movie's
no,
called.
to light or something like that. Yeah.
Spotlight.
Spotlight. That's
yeah.
what it was. Yeah.
There was a movie made about the explosion of the sexual and how the media was reporting it, the tension between should we report it and all this other stuff. But in Canada, actually, it goes back. Of course, where this started to come to light is what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about cases of sexual abuse. Those happened, prior to this, but probably pinpointing where this stuff started to come to light was the Mount Cashel Orphanage in St. John's, Newfoundland.
Okay.
And this was sort of the place where it was run by a group of Christian brothers, an order of religious from Ireland. And it was an orphanage for boys. And I think as early as 1975, that boys who were being physically beaten and brought to the hospital were also reporting that they were being sexually abused. I don't think it was until 1989 when it came to public light. And why I'm bringing this up is because not only because that was sort of the beginning of the revelation of what was happening behind closed doors in sort of church circles or on church property, but also to pinpoint what was happening at the time within the church and within society, because people were reporting that they were being physically and sexually abused. In this case, in the orphanage, and the RCMP and police authorities and hospital staff, bishops, other priests, like no one really wanted to go there. And I acknowledge the fact that the church was seen as such a guarded place, a holy place, that no one wanted to accuse the church of doing something this grotesque, right? And I think that was sort of common in society. You hear stories today, young boys and girls telling their parents in the 50s, 60s, 70s that a priest had been abusing them, and the priest says, "Don't you talk like that about father or
the
about
parents say, not the priest, but the parents say, don't talk about father that way.
Yeah, don't talk about father or sister that way or whatever it might be, And so there was this common sort of thing in society where we didn't talk about those things about the church. Then slowly it started to, from the Mount Cashel scandal, when it was revealed that there was cover-ups and all these things back in 1989, and Mount Cashel, of course, closed in 1990. In 1992, the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops, we're talking like, 35 years ago or 30 years ago, they wrote this document called From Pain to Hope. And in 1992, to address this scandal of sexual abuse was pretty huge, right? For the Canadian bishops to acknowledge, and God bless them for doing so. But that had little sort of effect on what was about to be uncovered.
Yeah.
Like the amount of sexual abuse cases in Canada, not to mention in the United States or like parts of the world where Catholicism existed. And so slowly you start to see dioceses start to have these cases of sexual abuse creep up. Sometimes the priests were dead.
Yeah.
Sometimes the sisters were dead. Yeah. Sometimes the brothers were dead, the monks, staff. Sometimes they were alive.
Yeah.
And sometimes they were arrested. And it wasn't just the sexual abuse that was so hurtful in the public eye. And that's not to take away, of course, the pain to the actual survivors. But also what was hurtful was when we started to discover how the cases of sexual abuse were handled.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big things for me is the sexual abuse in itself is very wrong and you can understand how hurtful it can be, and or maybe you can't understand how even hurtful it will be, the survivors and everything else. But then to the way the church handled it. I think there's two major faults that with the church. First of all, with members of the church, so the individual members, the individual people, and the way that they caused problems. But then the way that the church handled it, which is a big, and again, those are individual decisions by individual people in charge and in positions of trust. On top of all that, though, is just the church's sexual abuse is never okay. But even if to have it in a position of people who hold the gateway to heaven or hell, to hold the authority, the moral authority that the church held, and to have them be the ones not only to commit the abuse but even to try to cover it up, that became a much bigger. It ripped the wound so much deeper. And not to say that the wound wasn't already deep, because sexual abuse is such a serious thing, but to say that it was these people. So because when the people came forward to report the abuse, it wasn't handled properly. It wasn't and they were either told they hushed it up, or they were covered up, or they just moved the priest away, or whatever the case may be. And so that's a major. Those are some of the bigger faults I think that people have that haven't had the experience or don't have a direct connection to the sexual abuse. Their hurt comes from the way the church handled it, right?
Yeah, and I want to add the fact that the handling of the sexual abuse cases is really hurtful and confusing for us to understand today.
Yeah.
And I also want to acknowledge the fact that at the time that these cases were that these incidents of sexual abuse were being reported, it's hard to judge what happened back then with what we know today.
Yes.
Let me just say that first and foremost. Back then, just probably a common scenario, but I'm not thinking of anything in particular. An abuse report is made. The bishop is made aware of it. What was the common practice? To send someone to go get help, like you would send someone off to an alcohol treatment.
Yeah, or drugs.
Or drug treatment, or some sort of treatment. And these sexual abusers would go off to this treatment and do their term, whatever it might be.
Do their treatment. 2 years.
And someone at the center says,
they're cured.
Well, they've done their time. We've seen progress. And we don't think that they're a risk to reoffend. And the bishops or the leaders who are making decisions would say, okay, well, based on your analysis there, low risk of reoffending, we're going to put that priest in another church. And then it was just moving these people around to different locations where they continued to abuse. It was wrong. It was wrong, and it shouldn't have happened that way. In some cases, the bishops did not uncover the truth. And in some cases, bishops were following the advice of professionals who were giving them
their
reports
best guess knowledge from what we knew, but not that we
know now. Today, we would never say, oh, well, this person's at low risk to reoffend. Well, let's put them back in a parish. We would never do that. Just like we would never do that with a teacher.
Yeah.
Just like we would never do that with
a coach.
Anyone else, coach or but it was a different time, and it made for such much more catastrophic damage to people, which made the situation so much worse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when we were initially talking about this as an episode, because we were talking about obstacles or oppositions to Catholicism, and this is one that comes up, and it's hard to imagine anything that's been so damaging to the witness of the church. And you're saying, at the time, your parents were like, okay, you can't talk about a priest that way, or you can't, but that there was an instinct to defend the institution of the church, which itself isn't a bad instinct, but it allowed for the problem to be kind of exacerbated. But also to the point that, people will say, well, look at organized sports for youth, or look at teaching. Like coaches and teachers are not in a position of moral authority. Like this has been
that's
made
where-
all the more horrible by the fact that this is the person giving you a homily on how you should live every single week.
And what constitutes a sin, and what constitutes,
And from the perspective of like the in some cases criminal negligence of the administration or the institution, or the bishops, that these are the people who are defining moral law. These are the people who are. So again, it's made all the more horrible that these bad actors are in a position of moral authority. And just saying that this is damaging to the credibility of the church, the witness of the church, and this is a big hurdle for people to overcome. In my own case, so in the exact same week that I talked to a priest for the first time about going through RCIA, I was interested in becoming Catholic. The diocese where I approached a priest, a huge scandal landed where the bishop of that diocese was apprehended. They had child pornography on their laptop, and there's a huge that I would say was something that I couldn't just compartmentalize.
Yeah.
I couldn't just say, okay, this is a separate issue, to all the things that, and I would say that the abuse crisis delayed my being received into the church by about a year. It's something that it took me a long time to work through, because I think, again, you have that instinct to defend the church as, the mystical body of Christ, and, the gates of hell will not prevail. The church is indefectible. It's like, but at a governance level, at an institutional level, the church can err. The church can have bad processes in place. Yes, the church has come a long way to address those to update and correct those processes. But in the meantime, a lot of damage has been done. So again, that it's not something that we can just speak dismissively or jump to the defense of the church. That yes, we can defend the church per se.
Yeah.
But within the institution of the church, there are bad actors on an individual level, and a lot of ground to cover in terms of administration, to prevent these horrible things from, first of all, being covered up, but or first of all, ever happening again. But yeah, allowing for the mechanism to be covered up.
Yeah.
I think about your situation when you were becoming Catholic. The bishop of the diocese was apprehended, and then I think about like our current bishop today. Before he was the bishop of this diocese, he was heavily involved in actually investigating
Yeah.
and
Bringing to
gathering
light.
evidence, bringing to light information that brought a predatory priest down
Yeah.
and jailed and prosecuted in the court of law, and the work that he did and to help the victims of sexual abuse by this predatory priest, and it's like, of course it's a nice thing to hear, but it's, to me it was like, well, yeah, like the bishop of the diocese should be involved in making sure that his church, as he's the shepherd of the apostle of Christ in our area, he should be safeguarding the flock, right? So what he did should come naturally and should be the response of bishops.
Yeah.
So it's hard to comprehend, even me as a priest, that bishops not only were not sort of handling situations correctly, but also in your case, were part of the problem.
Yeah.
And it's hard. It's hard for people now. And of course, everyone will just go to that. Well, you still hear on TV today, or comedians, or Saturday Night Live, or whatever it might be, still make pedophilia jokes about priests.
Yeah.
It's just common lingo now. Priests are looked at with suspicion, and I must say that that as much as you might think, and I'm not speaking for all priests, but we deserve that. We deserve that. And we deserve that because as a fraternity of priests, we take on the sins of our brothers. And even though we're not responsible for that, we don't have anything to do with it, we're taking on sort of the consequences
Yeah, you're paying for the
of
consequences
what's happened in the past, and so we should.
Do you think it's something that affects why we have lower enrollment in their seminaries and everything else? Like it is, like you suggested, if you're walking down the aisle with a collar on, that a mother might react differently than if it's just me walking down the aisle or something without a collar. Like the mother's actually taking, like the society as a whole view priests as, not that they view priests as this, but that they tie a priest, and any priest. I was reading an article before and said, like, if you walk into a room as a priest, people just automatically judge you as if you either had some part to play in it or that you had some part in the cover up, even though you weren't even a priest at the time that a lot of this scandal happened, or whatever the case may be. You just take on that. Do you think it affects? Or is it a big decision that men have to go through in discerning the priesthood? Like, is it something that needs to come in there at all? Or is it something that by the grace of God, it just kind of...
Well, I'll say two things there. Number one, I think that for priests who were priests at the time of this explosion of when we started to find out and discover just how many cases of sexual abuse there were, I think it really has affected them.
Yeah.
And I see that in my brother priests who were priests during that time. You see them a little more gun shy.
Yeah.
Like you see them a little more hesitant to work with young people.
Yeah,
You
I
see
see
them
that.
a little more hesitant to get involved in youth ministry, or to be anywhere near children, to even interact with a child.
To go into the schools.
I remember a priest telling me that he was in the sacristy after mass, and all sorts of people were there, and this mother and this child came into the sacristy, and the kid wanted to approach the priest, and the priest kind of brushed off this whole encounter, and the mother came up to the priest and scolded him and said, all she wanted to do was to give you a hug.
Yeah.
And she was so, like, the child was sad that the priest had just kind of ignored him. And so the priest was telling the story. I didn't realize how much I was affected by the scandal, that I'm not even being a good shepherd to our young people in the parish, right? So on one side, I see that, yes, the priests who lived that experience are more hesitant. Second thing I'll say is, do I see a reason for decline? Like this is the reason for decline in people coming to the priesthood? No.
Yeah, okay.
I would say no, only because I think the decline there is just in general, maybe because of the sexual abuse scandal, maybe other things, or how society is. There's a decrease in the number of people practicing faith, and so obviously you're going to have a decrease in the amount of people who are hearing God calling them. Have people said, "I don't want to be a priest because of the scandal"? I've not seen that. Even when I was in the seminary for 6 years, you had these men who were ready to be priests despite what they knew they were going to face. And I found that very admirable. And I see my brothers who I was in the seminary with today, really living out their priesthood, sensitive to the needs of everyone, including the survivors of sexual abuse, but not letting it hinder their ministry to any people.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I was going to say that, like, even if there is a decline in kind of the quantity of people who are, discerning vocation as a priest, the quality of the young priests that are coming up, that you could say even like 30 years ago, somebody aspiring to be a priest, it's an honored position. It's distinguished. It's, you're in now somebody becoming a priest is really signing up for some level
For
of
ridicule.
or
Yeah.
there's a recognition that there's this general suspicion that that's part of the decision. And you could even say, kind of conversely, back when a lot of this stuff was happening, you would have predators. Like, this is kind of a documented modus operandi of predators, is that they infiltrate institutions that give them unrestricted access to children, or this is
Teachers,
how
coaches, priests.
yeah, this is how sexual
they work.
predatory behavior
Yeah.
manifests. That at a time where you had a large quantity of people wanting to become priests, this is when a lot of this stuff happened. So I think now that we have kind of that a high concentration of quality in priests, it's a step towards kind of avoiding that situation, or they're in it because they believe it.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think about back in the 60s, 70s, there was an increase in people moving towards who were moving towards the priesthood, and a lot of the protocols that we have in seminaries today were not present back then,
Yes.
right? Today, I can speak from my own experience, and I can speak as a vocation director who sort of oversees people's journey through the seminary, that the psychological testing, including psychosexual testing, is like top notch. I know for ourselves, we send our candidates to some of the like highest renowned institutes for psychological testing, and it's that was probably unheard of in the 1960s, 1970s, when people were kind of flooding the seminaries. I wasn't in the seminary back then, but it wasn't as intense as it is today. The testing that they go through. It should have been there, I guess, all along, right? Again, I don't want that to sound like, well, now there's not a problem, but I think that it is fair to say that the church has made good steps to prevent things like that happening again, despite the tragedy that occurred to many people through the sexual abuse. I think through it, the church has made good steps to move forward that won't be as prevalent again, or won't happen again.
Yeah, I think every survivor of sexual abuse will be happy with the steps that have been taken towards what they see now to protect what has happened to avoid what's happened in the past. I think most of them will say that these are good steps. But what are those steps? Because I think a lot of times we don't quite understand where we came from to where we are now versus where we came from. Because we know, and again, you don't want to ever say, well, look like this is not a problem anymore. But there are steps that have been taken. I mean, one of the things that the Catholic Church was the leader in was establishing these safe protocols when hiring. I remember it was one of the first things whenever I was doing youth ministry. Before I had to do it as a teacher, I was teaching and a youth minister at the same time. And as a youth minister, I had to go and get a police record check, a vulnerable section check, to make sure my background was all fine. And that was probably about 5, maybe even 10 years before I became a teacher. And before I had to do it as a teacher. So I was doing it working with the Catholic Church. So what are some of those steps that the church has maybe implemented since then that has kind of said, you suggested that there's a lot more testing going on for priests entering into the seminary. There's a lot more discernment there, or now that we're aware that this is something that has happened, there's some pointing out of that. And then,
even what you said about kind of the shift in perspective from, 1970s, you can't say anything like that about a priest, to current situation where the bishop brings the priest to the police station and we say good, like this is the perspective we should. I think that shift in perspective is a result of a lot of the protocols that have been put in place, and it's also worth noting that through these protocols, through this kind of shift in perspective, nobody wants to see this eradicated from the church more than the church. So even when we're talking about kind of the scandals and the reports, the historical reports that a lot of dioceses, especially in the U.S., have published in recent years, it's worth noting that this information was voluntarily given. Sometimes these inquiries are spearheaded by the diocese itself to kind of rectify this. So and we said the problem has occurred on a number of levels. So you have the bad actors, the individuals who are committing these issues. You said there are protocols in place. There are training that you receive to just avoid the situation where this can happen. Risk management that protects the child, but also the priest against potentially false allegations or things like that. But you also kind of in recent years you have Pope Francis developing instituting the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors. You have in 2019 the motu proprio Vos Estis Lex Mundi, where it's actually this is the protocol for addressing misconduct by bishops, by higher level, and again, a lot of this comes from high-profile cases like Cardinal McCarrick. These things where the people either perpetrating these crimes directly or are guilty of criminal level negligence in how they're administrating their diocese. They don't have anyone above them that has visibility on their day-to-day operations. So it created a mechanism within the church to actually address these higher-level systemic problems that prevent the possibility of cover-up, present the possibility of, okay, no, we're just going to reassign this priest, and so again, the steps that have been taken to kind of correct these problems. Yes, the church is in a much better situation now than it was, but I think a big part of that is that shift in perspective from let's bring this to light, let's eradicate this from the church, and let's move forward in a way that protects children and protects.
So as you said, some of the big things that have happened there is now a bishop, when he hears about this, his first reaction is to report it to Rome directly, right? He asks for a third party to investigate and reports the allegations to Rome.
Yeah, if it's one of those higher level.
Exactly. And so those are ways of taking it outside of the local buddy system that might have been an issue from before, and automatically putting it into an outside perspective, coming in and saying, yes, right's right, what's wrong, with no I'm going to say without any relationships involved, without any, and so in doing that, those were some of the steps.
Yeah.
On top of that, even from the Knights of Columbus, as a Knights of Columbus, we have to go through training nowadays. To just be a Grand Knight, I have to go through vulnerable sector training on identifying problem red flags, I'm going to say, when coming and dealing with minors. Even though my council doesn't deal with minors hardly at all, I still go through that training once a year. So all these little things that kind of come into place have been spearheaded by the church, but also the organizations within the church, to make sure that as much as we possibly can at this point, this will never happen again. As much as we can possibly. So I think it's a step forward from the mess that we find, the tragedy, the awfulness that we were involved in. And it's a step to make sure that, like you said, no one wants this more than the church itself to come out of this, to make sure that this never happens again.
And the other steps, we're talking about steps that the churches have made. So part of the almost every diocese across the world has a safe environment policy.
Yes.
And so that is not just for priests.
Yeah.
That is for
That's a really good
parish
point.
staff members
Choir directors.
and any volunteer position that is deemed high risk.
Yeah.
So visiting seniors in their home, working with youth ministry, children's liturgy, anything, counting money, anything that's considered high risk. There's a process which usually includes a police records check, and with an annual offense declaration. There's a code of conduct that dioceses have. I know our diocese has a pretty thorough code of conduct that volunteers in high-risk positions have to abide by and agree to. There are training and orientation requirements. There are all these different reviews. And so all these processes that are put in place are not just for priests or nuns or people who are, you would say, are typically connected to sexual abuse, but really to make the entire parish structure,
The entire organization, the entire
a
institute.
safe environment.
Yeah, yeah, and you see that. I think the church is a leader in that. Like I said, like I had it 10 years before. Then I became a teacher. I mean, 10 years as a teacher, and then I had to start doing it as a teacher. Started to do very similar type stuff, and so it's filtered now into the education system or coaching or all that, wherever you might find vulnerable people. Not that it's a good step forward, and it's a way now that we have throughout Canada and I think U.S. and especially one of the things I was thinking about is this is something that the church has taken on worldwide. Like the church is involved worldwide. So even in countries maybe that, like in Canada and the U.S. and Western countries, it might make more sense that these protocols are now in place, especially as they come to light and everything else. But maybe in other countries, there still might be this hush hush mentality or whatever else. But the church is taking this to like across the entire world, and this is the policy. So they're implementing this in place across the entire world, where other countries that might have that still is hush hush from the 70s. It's not okay. It's not, and maybe you're going to start to see this again in the schools and have it infiltrate. Let's just say every area of government, every area of every institution.
Yeah. What you were saying too about and I think it was one of the specific recommendations of the Pontifical Commission to bring the inquiry and investigation out of the local context.
Yes.
That's exactly
So
it. That is like okay. For the reasons you said, it's like if the hospital staff or the person in government or the police officer is connected or has a conflict of interest, that that's one of the recommendations that they made, and that's something that other institutions are adopting as an aspect of risk management. But also another thing that's happened is that the extension of these policies from the protection of children to the protection of
seniors,
vulnerable
or any
populations, people with special needs, all kinds of things that again you will have bad actors, that people are free moral agents and will make good decisions or terrible decisions, and they will have consequences. But again, to see that an effort is being made, that there's actually a review process. And it's like, how effective are these protocols? What changes do we need to make to become more effective? Gives a lot more confidence now than there has been kind of historically.
What would you say then to people, Matt, because you've been in the experience, but also Father as a priest, what would you say to the people that have written off the church because of these circumstances? What would you say to them? What would you say to them? Yeah. What would you like not the victims per se, because I think but to the people who have seen this or experienced scandal in their diocese or around the area and have written off the church completely. What would we say to them?
Yeah, I think to start with, I think it's a sympathetic position. I can say, like, personally, I had a really hard time working through this, and it took time and it took process, and there were times where I was on either side of the fence. I have another friend who was very invested in Roman Catholic ministry, and it was actually the scandal around Jean Vanier, who's the founder of L'Arche, who's very involved, that it was a bridge too far for him. It was a failure of not the church per se, but of the administration of the church. And he ended up becoming Eastern Catholic. So still believes the sacraments, still, is not walking away from the church. Again, that has my sympathy. But again, I don't think, I think you can meaningfully distinguish between the church as the mystical body of Christ, and that, like, I don't think you can walk away from once you understand it, or once you are involved, engaged in the sacramental life. But I think that remaining with the church and pursuing all of these things, actually, bringing to light things that shouldn't happen, really championing these protocols and these, the perspective of the church that says, yes, let's get rid of this, let's move forward.
Yeah, I think there has to be some sort of healing process too, right? And I would say healing process for survivors and people from the outside looking in, maybe, because people who are survived sexual abuse at the hands of priests or religious often weren't treated very well. Early, there were sort of hush settlements and, keep quiet about this and we'll give you
NDAs
this
and all
and
that
whatever
stuff,
it is.
yeah.
Today, is it even any better? There's a lot of lawsuits and cash settlements and all these things. And, people say, oh, my money is going to all these lawsuits. That's not the case. The money you donate to your parish doesn't go to these lawsuits. But is that enough to help those who have survived sexual abuse? No. Some dioceses offer counseling, offer all these different things, but it's hard in that situation not to feel re-victimized because, you got to go and share your story and share your story and share your story. And then they kind of give you counseling. And then they kind of keep up on, how much counseling do you need?
And are you getting counseled by a priest?
No.
Okay,
That's
yeah,
not,
that's the question.
they don't do that. They have professionals
Outside of that,
areas,
good.
And will people who have been victimized in this way, will they ever heal? You always kind of carry that with you for the rest of your life, and it's just really, to me, it's really sad that a priest or a nun or someone involved in the church has contributed to that hurt, because for that person, it's almost cut off a relationship with Christ, who is our divine physician, who was our healer. And I've heard stories of people who were sexual abuse survivors who are still faithful and talk about their faith, and, some really beautiful stories that way. But obviously, you can't expect that from everyone because it's hard. Then there's the healing from other people on the outside looking in, people who distance themselves from a church because of what's happened, also are separated from the Church of Jesus Christ because of the actions of someone in authority of that church, right? And honestly, my mind always goes to the scripture. If any of you, lead others to
millstone.
Cause one of these to
lose their faith or go astray, it would be better for you to have a millstone tied around your neck and thrown into the sea.
Yeah.
I truly believe that people who have perpetrated this evil in people's lives will be judged harshly by the Lord. I just, because of the scandal, because of the harm they caused individual people they abused, and their families and their friends and parishioners, and the public scandal that it made. Like, they have caused so many people to be removed from the life of faith, right? So how do people find healing from that if that's all you're thinking? Well, I invite people not to put their trust and their love and their hope in their human leaders.
Yeah.
Right? but to really come to know the Lord, because the Lord heals. The Lord is all good and all loving, and the Lord wants even people who have been victimized or scandalized to know the fullness of his love. And it's unfortunate that some of the leaders that, are responsible for leading the Church of Jesus Christ have caused harm. Hopefully, maybe today, there are people who are in those positions of leadership in the church, and I know are working hard to sort of make a difference in the lives of people who have been affected by the scandal. But there's no easy answer.
No, there isn't.
And there's no expectation from people to come back, or there's no, every journey is different. Every hurt is different. And so I pray for people who are away from the church, either by their own separation from the church, or because someone else has caused a separation for them from the church. And I think that the Lord has a special soft spot for people like that, because he yearns to be close to everyone.
Yeah.
And if someone else has caused that separation, I think the Lord has a soft spot to bring those back to his embrace.
Yeah. Good.
Amen.
Well, that was a tough one.
Yeah, not a very fun lifting up episode.
I don't think we laughed very much during this episode.
No, I don't. And probably those listening, everyone just needs some fresh air right now. I think, just to have a little breather. But worth speaking about.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think that, Matt, you said the good thing here was that things were brought to the light.
Yeah.
And until they're brought to the light, then
There can't be healing.
we can't move forward. And so the church found out the hard way. Those who suffered at the hands of clergy are victimized and carry this burden with them for their life. But these things are brought to the light, and now we're able, hopefully, to learn from the past and move forward in a better way. If anyone wants to add a comment, you can send us a comment at askus@thecatholicbuzz.com, or drop us a line at the bottom of the video or podcast. And that's all the time we have. We went way over time today, but I think it was worth it. So for Josh Sullivan and Matt Van Milgen, my name is Father Daniele. We'll see you next time on The Catholic Buzz.